The mirror didn't change when she left the room. That was the first detail that didn't feel right, because everything else in the house followed movement, light, and presence the way it always had. But the reflection stayed exactly where it had been, as if it had no reason to follow her at all. And if you're someone who believes reflections only exist because you're there to create them, you might want to stay with this story, because hers didn't seem to need her anymore. It was the winter of 1902, in a quiet townhouse just outside Bath, England, where the walls held warmth longer than the air, and the mirrors had been in place longer than anyone could remember. Her name was Elowen Myreth, and until that winter she had never questioned something as simple as a reflection. It was automatic, predictable, unquestionable. If she moved, it moved. If she left, it vanished. That was how it had always been. Until it wasn't. The first moment she noticed it, she didn't react. Not immediately. She had been standing near the mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the sleeve of her dress. Her attention focused more on the fabric than the glass. She stepped back, turned slightly, and walked toward the door. And something didn't follow. She didn't see it clearly, not directly, just a hesitation, a delay, a fraction of a second where the reflection seemed to remain where it had been, before catching up. She paused at the doorway, her hand resting lightly against the wood, her eyes narrowing slightly as she tried to recall the exact moment. But the mind is quick to correct what it doesn't understand. It's nothing, she told herself quietly, and for a while, that was enough. The second time, it wasn't. She moved across the room more quickly, her attention not on the mirror at all, but she felt it, something behind her not aligning the way it should. This time, she turned immediately. The reflection stood exactly where it should. Perfect, still, unchanged. And that made it worse, because now she wasn't sure if she had imagined the first moment or missed the second. Days passed. Nothing happened, or at least nothing she could prove. And slowly the certainty returned, until the night had changed completely. She had been sitting in the dim light of a single lamp, the rest of the room resting in soft shadow, when she stood and crossed toward the door again. But this time she stopped before reaching it, because something in her chest tightened. Not from fear, but from awareness. And without thinking, she stepped backward, slowly, carefully, keeping her eyes fixed on the mirror. Her reflection stepped back too, perfectly aligned, perfectly timed, nothing wrong, nothing delayed, and yet something felt different. Because this time, she was watching it. Not moving naturally, not distracted, fully aware, and for the first time, the reflection hesitated. Not long, not obvious, but enough. Enough to exist. Her breath slowed, because that meant one thing. It wasn't failing to follow her. It was choosing when to. That realization didn't come with fear, it came with something worse. Understanding. Because if a reflection could choose, then it wasn't just an image anymore. That night she didn't sleep easily, not because she was afraid of the mirror, but because she couldn't stop thinking about it, about the delay, about the hesitation, about the moment it didn't behave the way it should. The next morning, she tested it, deliberately. She stood in front of the mirror, completely still, her eyes fixed on her own reflection, her breathing slow and controlled. Then, she stepped away, quickly, without warning. Her body moved first. Her reflection did not, for a single, clear moment. It remained where it had been. Standing, looking forward, at the space where she had just been. Her heart dropped, because this time, there was no mistake, no confusion, no misinterpretation. The reflection hadn't followed, it had stayed. She stepped back into place instantly, her eyes locked onto the glass, her breathing uneven now, and the reflection caught up, returning to match her position, as if nothing had happened, but something had, and she couldn't ignore it anymore. From that moment on, everything changed, not suddenly, not dramatically, but consistently. The cha reflection no longer followed perfectly. Sometimes it lagged. Sometimes it adjusted. Sometimes it didn't move at all until she was already gone. She began avoiding it, covering the mirror when she could, turning away from reflective surfaces. But the problem wasn't the mirror, it was what it showed. Because no matter how much she avoided it, there would always be a moment where she saw it again. And each time, it felt more independent, more present, less connected. Until one evening, she made a decision. Not out of fear, but out of certainty she would leave the room, completely, and not come back. Not immediately, not quickly, but long enough to know. She stood in front of the mirror one last time, her expression calm, her breathing steady. And then she turned and walked out, slowly, deliberately, without looking back. The hallway felt longer than usual, quieter, heavier. But she didn't stop, didn't hesitate, didn't turn, because she knew if she looked again, she might see something she couldn't forget. Minutes passed, then more, until the silence became something she couldn't ignore anymore. And slowly, carefully, she stepped back toward the doorway, her hand resting against the frame. Her breath held, and then she looked. The mirror still stood where it had always been, the room unchanged, the light the same. But the reflection was not empty. It stood there, exactly where she had been, still, facing forward, not following her, not reacting, just watching. Her chest tightened, because in that moment, everything became clear. The reflection hadn't knighted her to exist. It had only knighted her to begin. And now I want to ask you something. If something that was supposed to depend on you suddenly continued without you, watching, existing, staying behind, and would you go back into that room? Or would you leave it exactly the way it is, knowing something of you might still be there? Tell me your answer in the comments. And if stories like this stay with you longer than they should, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay for the next story.